Welcome to episode 209 of the Sisters in Loss podcast. Today's guest became a mother at 19 and used her experiences to become a doula, a fertility awareness method educator, and a nutritionist. Barakah Sahaiel became pregnant and she and her partner went on vacation to celebrate this new journey. It was then she knew something was wrong and she began to miscarry. In this episode, Barakah takes us on the journey of finding a hospital in another country, the language barrier, and how she honored her baby by taking her baby back home with her. This episode is for you if you have ever experienced a miscarriage and may have done it in an extraordinary circumstance like being on vacation or at home. Here is Barakah Sahaiel. Welcome, Barakah, to the podcast.
Hello, everyone.
Yes. So I would love for you to open and share with us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Barakah. I am a full spectrum doula. So that is fertility awareness method education, birthing doula, and postpartum and spontaneous and elective abortion. I basically guide and explore with a woman throughout all cycles of like her feminine health journey, I would say. And then on top of that, I'm also an artist and a model. And so I consider myself like a really multidimensional person in that way. And, but I mean, at the end of the day, the goal is to always be not just someone's inspiration, but also to help other people really just learn themselves. I think like a lot of the bigger problems that are going on in the world are a lack of understanding of self. It's not really we're, fighting other people. Sometimes we're fighting our own internal struggles. So if I can help women like gain alignment in a holistic way, then it just kind of spreads a ripple effect for the entire world,
Yes. And we met back in, I want to say it was June. Was it June 2019?
It was. June
2019. Yeah. At the Doula Training International Conference. Yes. In Austin. And you're actually from Texas too, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'm originally from Trinidad, but I grew up in Texas, in Houston, and went to college in Austin. So I live in Austin. So.
Gotcha. And that's kind of how we met. I remember I was like, I don't think she's staying with us when we were staying at the time. But yeah, so we met at the DTI conference. Obviously, all the Black birth workers kind of congregated together and we
definitely. We're like, oh yeah, like everyone who was a Black woman at that event, like I know them now.
Right, exactly. Like we knew each other, we exchanged information. Like we were just like, all right, we're going to be friends on Facebook, on Instagram, all the places, right, just to stay in contact. And then obviously, they went virtual in 2020. And I don't know if they're doing the conference again in 2021. I assume that they are. But they probably are still going to have some virtual aspect of it. But yeah, so I knew then about your story, but obviously, the stars and everything aligned for us to have the opportunity to share it here now at this time. And I would love for you to just take us back on your journey to motherhood and share with us your loss story.
Yeah. So, wow, it's so crazy thinking about that, because when we met, like at the Born Into This conference, I had just started an organization called Birthing Our Ancestors. And Birthing Our Ancestors is like it's like a group space that I facilitate where for women who have experienced any type of womb trauma. So that's spontaneous elective abortion, that's rape, that's endometriosis, all of these things, right? So the reason why I started it is because it actually started with me and a friend of mine, and me and her hadn't talked in a while. And in that period, I had went through my first spontaneous abortion or miscarriage, and she had just had her first abortion. And so elective abortion. And so it's interesting because now I feel like the story that we met on was like my experience with that loss, you know, and that transition. Instead of looking at these souls as like losses, I should look at them more so as a transition, because I mean, at the end of the day, on a spiritual level, like I don't own these beings, right? You know, we are given children to like raise them and take care of them and nurture them into being great members of, you know, the universal society. But like it's not like we own them. That's just something that is ingrained in us, you know? So it's interesting because now, I mean, I'm actually 3 months now postpartum, because I was telling you, I was pregnant again last year at the end of June. And then I went into preterm labor on a road trip with my partner while I was pregnant. And it was very different. It was a very different experience from loss that I experienced, you know, or transitions. So it's really funny because now I feel like I have gotten over certain aspects of going into preterm labor. And, you know, it's crazy because, you know, I've read about preterm labor, you know, I'm a doula. So I've read about different scenarios to expect with births and understood that preterm labor was something that would happen, but I just never, like, to actually experience it is something so different. It's so different experiencing it. It's very confusing. It's very, I don't know, you just feel so many different types of emotions. Like, because I didn't even realize that I was going into preterm labor until later.
Tell us about that journey, because I think that a lot of folks may not know, who are listening, what some of those signs and symptoms are that you realized that, you know, as you were going along the way, and then really after you actually started to be in labor, you know?
Right. Yeah. So I remember we went like I said, we went on a 2-week road trip, me and my partner. We drove from Austin, Texas to Tijuana, Mexico. And at the time, I was 5 months pregnant. So, you know, I don't know. I feel like every woman is different in terms of this, but I mean, I have a 6-year-old, and with my 6-year-old, I traveled a lot when I was pregnant with him. So I felt like, you know, we wanted to have like an experience together, like me and my partner and, you know, my pregnant baby, the baby I was pregnant with. So anyways, the last night of our trip, we were in Taos, New Mexico. This is coming back from Tijuana, going back to Austin. And we spent the night there. And I remember the day before, like before we went to sleep, we had went on this hike and it had snowed. It's like November, right? And it had snowed, and it's all these hills and it's gorgeous. It's the mountains, it's the pine trees and the snow. It's beautiful, but it's so cold. And I honestly hate cold. I hate being cold. And I remember we went on this hike and I just started feeling really achy. And then we stopped at a grocery store right before we went back to our room. We were staying at the Earthships in Taos, New Mexico, which is really cool. Everyone should check it out. It's like a self-sustaining home that was designed by like this architect in the 1970s. And it basically has its own like gray water system and like rain collection system. And it's really cool. But anyways, we went back we went back there, and I remember telling him, it's so cold. It's so cold. And so we had like a fireplace. We had like a fireplace inside of the room. And so he was putting wood in the fireplace and keeping it warm, but I just kept feeling achy. So I was just like moving my body and doing yoga on a chair and like moving my hips and in front of the fire. And I remember being like, I just need to lay down and go to sleep. So then I went to sleep, and the whole night I kept waking up screaming, just in pain, in such pain. And at first it's so crazy because it's like, we went for that walk at like probably 5 p.m. Around 6 p.m. I was like, started feeling like that achiness, right? And then like, at some point between maybe like 10 p.m. and like 2 a.m., I was waking up out of my sleep like in full labor. And so my phone was dead. I remember thinking, is this preterm labor? Like, am I in actual labor? Because it just happened so quickly. Like, I just went to sleep thinking, I'm very close to 6 months pregnant right at this point. So I'm probably just having, Braxton Hicks, and my body's just, tightening, getting ready for my actual birth, right? And then I remember I kept thinking, I was just like laying in bed, feeling like literal labor pains. I'm like, I don't know. I think it's going to be okay. Just go back to sleep. And finally, I couldn't take it anymore. The intensity was so intense. And I started counting down on how long my contractions were. And so I wake up my partner and I'm like, hey, baby, wake up. Something's wrong. And I was like, you need to call the hospital. Something's wrong. And we're like in this small, Taos is not that big. There was literally only one hospital. Luckily, it was only 5 minutes away, but there was only one hospital, and so I turned over and I looked on the phone. My phone was dead. So then I got his phone and I'm like, what are the symptoms of preterm labor? And then back pain, which is like my lower back. It's like burning, literally burning, just like regular labor. Just that sensation, the sensation feeling like you have to go poop, like all hitting you at once. And then you just feel like that pressure. And so I had all of those symptoms and I was like, shit, like, I can't believe I'm going to be going into labor in the middle of this place I didn't know. I had 2 doulas in Austin. I had a midwife. I had an acupuncturist. I really thought I planned for this birth, So like there was a lot of that going through my head. I'm like, I can't believe I'm just in the middle of nowhere. And this is how I'm going to have this baby. And then I started getting the anxiety of like, oh my God, like, I'm like, what are the hospital reviews? I'm like a Black woman in this small town. Like, is this going to be like a horror story? It was just, all of those things were just like going through my mind. And it was a really crazy, crazy experience. But I mean, either way, it was going to be something that was going to happen regardless. I mean, my son was born that morning at like 3 a.m. and he was born in the placenta. His heart was beating when he came out, but Sean picked him up and like he died in his arms, So it was different. It was my previous spontaneous abortion. It was, I was actually only 12 weeks. And so it was a very different experience, like transitioning like a 12-week child, then transitioning like someone who had hands and eyes and feet and face, So yeah.
Yeah. So What did you all do? Did you all do any rituals, or I mean, obviously you were in another state, so were you able to do anything? Have take the remains? What were you able to do with their baby? I think that's so tough to do, especially when you go out of town and you're just going for vacation and you experience this loss. You're kind of almost frozen in time on the next steps.
Yeah, definitely frozen. Yeah, that was something I kept, because me and Sean were both just like, I mean, we were depressed for like 2 months, like very in deep depression for like 2 months. And that was something that kept coming up for me, was like, I can't feel anything. Like I just can't feel anything. Like my whole life is now paused. And it was just such a crazy experience. I mean, honestly, it was a lot. It really was a lot, girl, because I mean, we're in another state, so, and we have to like get back to Texas, right? And so they wanted us to do all this paperwork. Originally, when we first were in the hospital, someone had came in from some office like in Santa Fe, which is like a little bit south of where we were, like southwest of where we were. But it's like, the major city in New Mexico. And so they wanted, because he was over 20 weeks, they wanted to do like an autopsy and like cut up his body. Oh girl, it was just so, we were just like, oh my God, like anything but that. And then it would have been like this whole 3-day process where they would have to like drive his body up to Santa Fe, and then we would have to drive to it was just going to be such a thing. And so eventually we didn't have to do that, because one of the funeral directors came up to the hospital to talk to us. And he also talked to this department who wanted to do an autopsy on our baby. And they ended up like saving us that headache. And so in order to legally like take his body across state lines, we had to either cremate him or put him in embalming fluid. And so, embalm him. And so that was such a weird thing too, because it's like, we had just had the baby, and we're very like spiritual, and my partner is like, he was like raised Hindu. So like we hadn't decided exactly how we wanted to release, because I feel like a big part of us hadn't released him ourselves, like we hadn't released the idea that we were like having a child. It's just one of those crazy things where you're like, wow, I'm attached to something that I haven't met or even truly know what to exist, like, because I feel like when you're pregnant, for women, like, we have this very in tune relationship with our children because they literally grow inside of our bodies. And so having that experience makes us, it just makes us feel more connection to things that we can't see with our eyes, It just was it was really hard. So we didn't know what we wanted to do right away. So instead we just like had him embalmed because we were like, okay. But I was worried about embalming him because, a part of us were like, we had talked about releasing his body in the river, like here. But then we were like, well, we talked to the funeral director about it, and the funeral director was like, well, the problem is like if someone finds it, then it would just be a whole big thing, which that makes a lot of sense, like people in this city, like the Colorado River flows through Austin. And so, people use the water a lot here. So it could very easily, someone could find it, or, of course we had like other ideas of making sure it wasn't found. But I mean, still, it just wouldn't, it would be too much of a risk in that way. And so we had talked about it, and we hadn't decided that's what we wanted to do either, but we were just trying to figure out what could be possible, because we were just still so attached, like just so attached. And so we ended up going with the embalmment though, because at least that was better than just like coming back home with ashes. And it was a weird experience. We spent probably 4 days. No, maybe not 4 days. Maybe, no, that's not true. Maybe like 2 or 3 days we spent with the baby in the house. We kept him under our altar because the process was with the funeral home, because eventually we did decide that we were going to cremate him. And so the funeral home, their process is they come and get the body, and then they keep the body like in their facilities until the cremation. And so we were able to do that. The body was at our house for a few days, and it was okay. And then we left, and then we had the body cremated. And then me and Sean did we just did like a spiritual cleansing and ritual by this tree. There's a tree that's like off the banks. It looks like it's probably 300 years old. It's a really big tree. And half of its trunks are like on the riverbank, and they go under the water. And then the other half is like on top of the land. And so we did this right before we did this shoot, right before we went on this trip. And we did the shoot like by this tree. And it was supposed to be the art behind it was supposed to be, we were going to shoot like every 2 or 3 months of my pregnancy together. So you would see like how our bodies have changed throughout the pregnancy, but it was going to be the exact same concept for like every 3 months. And so we did the first one right before we left on this trip. And then that's where we gave the ashes back into the water, is like by this tree. So we just spent like the whole day there, like in silence, and we like burned some affirmations. We smoked a joint. It was just something that I feel like it really did like a lot of completion. Like I felt, because we had spent like the whole month of December, and then up until this point, up until we gave those ashes back to the water, I feel like we were super depressed that entire time. Like we didn't leave the house. I cried every day. It was just, it really needed to feel, we really needed that physical release and, acceptance. We were different after that. So.
No, I love that you shared that part of the journey, because obviously we don't talk a lot about what a lot of folks do as far as rituals and things in the postpartum period. So for you all to have that opportunity as you grieved over the last few months, and then now be able to release and put his ashes back to the earth. I truly believe that we all have to have that physical manifestation of being able to release and truly grieve our losses. And it may look like, returning ashes, or it may look differently, like releasing a balloon in the sky, or having some other outlet that you focus on. So I would love for you to really share with us, how has your postpartum journey been up until now, as you navigated those first few weeks up until, kind of where you are now?
Yeah, I mean, man, postpartum journey it is really a journey. It's really a journey. I mean, just the simple fact. So something else I forgot to mention earlier. So at the end of last year, I self-published my first literary piece. And so it's called the 28-Day Moon Journal. And so it's like a journal. Like I was telling you, I do a big part of what I do with my doula work is I do fertility awareness method coaching. And so fertility awareness method is just being able to use cervical fluid, basal temperature, or waking temperature, and cervical position to kind of tell where you are within your cycle. And so you can use it as a birth control, or you can use it as a way to get pregnant. It's something that is a part of the 28-Day Moon Journal so that you can track these things. But it doesn't just do that. It also tracks nutrition. It tracks your dreams. It has prompts for 29 days. So it does all of these tracking for you, because I believe that nutrition, the moon cycle, the actual moon cycle, and where we are in the moon cycle, and your mental or emotional state, and how much exercise you're doing, all these things, they come into play with how healthy women are, right? That was something else that I started doing, because I published it at the end of the year when I was pregnant. So I couldn't use it because it's designed only for people who are postpartum or people who are trying to get pregnant, right? And so it was interesting because I started using it right after we transitioned him. And I transitioned him on a full moon, on the lunar eclipse, actually. And then my first period came not the next full moon, but the full moon after that. So it was 2 moon cycles. It took 2 moon cycles. And so before that, I bled on full moons. Those were not full moons, new moons are when I bled. And so my cycle was adjusted to the moon cycle. And so, but the last 2 months, it's been these periods that are so weird. They haven't been synchronized with the moon at all. And I've been extremely emotional. Prior to having this last transition, I experienced a lot of really happy periods. I was one of those weird people where people are don't you get cramps? I'm no. Don't you get moody and bitchy when you're in your period? And I'm no, I feel great. I'm happy, and I almost feel happier when I'm on my period than when I'm ovulating. I feel I felt more emotional ovulating than I did on my period prior to this last transition. And I was telling Sean the other day, because I actually just started my period at the beginning of this week. And I was telling Sean the other day, I was something's wrong. And I think a big part of it is because prior to, I was on a pescatarian diet prior to getting pregnant with my son, my last son. That I was pescatarian with 100% plant-based, no dairy, no meat, just fish and veggies and fruit, rice, whatever. And so, but when I got pregnant, I started having really intense meat cravings. So I just would eat meat because that's what my body wanted and that's what my baby wanted. So I ate a lot of meat then, but I feel I've still been eating a lot of meat. And prior to being pescatarian, I was vegan for 3.5 years. So I feel my body is just going through a lot of disassociation, as well as just my hormones are trying to regulate themselves. Because also another thing is, we forget how much hormones we consume, like in the everyday, like American diet. The everyday American diet has a lot of hormones in it. So if you're adding that on top of hormones that I'm just having from being postpartum, because I'm still technically 3 months postpartum, you know, it's like I can't keep up with it. Like, I mean, I have cried the first day of my period, the last 3 periods I've had, I have cried. I have gone through like an intense day of just crying, like, and I'm sad and I'm triggered and and it's directly related to like my hormones. Like, and I mean, obviously, like every life's not perfect. So, I mean, it's not like I'm just crying for no reason. But I mean, also, you know, a lot of it predominantly it's my hormones. So my plan is to continue using my journal and to clean up my diet from meat again in a very holistic way. And then, you know, bringing back like more prayer, more meditation into my life and ashwagandha. So that's something else. I have lupus. And so it affects me on like an inflammatory level where sometimes my body just like attacks itself and it causes like my joints to get all inflamed. And so I kept myself off prescription drugs by being vegan, pescatarian, and I take herbs like ashwagandha. And so that's something else I feel like I need to reintroduce back into my body as well, are my herbs, because that has been something that has helped me have like just my response, like that the response that my brain has, like in regards to its function. I feel it gets a lot more sharp after I've been taking like ashwagandha for a few weeks, or that's kind of like what the journey has been like. It's been a lot of release and just realigning myself. And I think being able to write things down in my journal has been something that has really helped too, because I can organize my thoughts in a way where I can look back and I can kind of see these patterns, you know, with my own body. I think that is the biggest thing for me, is just learning how to align, because I mean, you need a little bit of everything, right? And you can have too much of everything as well. So just maintaining that alignment is something that I strive for. And it's something that I feel is completely necessary when you're talking about healing from any type of traumatic event. Yeah.
No, I absolutely love all that you said around how you're healing. You really explained a lot about the fertility awareness method, which we are 100% components of here, and how that aligns with your diet, your nutrition, your hormone level. And I hope that for those who are listening, really take away from this part of the conversation is that, you know, really she's in tune with her body enough to know what her body needs at the time frame, and really trying to switch things up in her diet and her nutrition to see if that makes her feel better. You know, you talked about the herb ashwagandha. You know, there's so many benefits from that. Besides the energy and things, I mean, there's so many other benefits from it as well. So I love that you talked about that and how that's been helping you out and helping you really navigate grief and healing journey that you're on. So I would love for you to just leave our listeners some encouraging words as they navigate their grief journey, their healing journey. You know, many of them are trying to conceive, you know, as we are in the midst of this pandemic, or they may be currently pregnant. What encouraging words can you leave with our listeners?
Yeah. So we had a midwife, and she came by probably 2 weeks after we had came back from our trip. And, you know, after we had transitioned our son, and she said she believes that God, whoever that is to whoever you are, puts people in your life in times of trauma in order for you to see who you're supposed to work with, like in times of greatness. And I think that is something to be said and something to be understood, because sometimes we look at traumatic things that happen to us and we're so in pain by it that it starts to mess with us. Like, but it's really, the pain behind it is your ego, you know? Because if you're really looking at some situations, especially traumatic ones, they always have a other side to that coin that that brings a certain awareness that gives you a lot of peace. So always being thankful for that side of it as well. That's what I would say for you guys.
Yes, I love it. So where can our listeners connect with you after this episode?
They can connect with me on my website. You can subscribe to www.iambarakah, BARAKAH.com. And I'm also facilitating 4 retreats this year in different countries, Costa Rica, Kenya, and Texas. So connect with me there as well. That's something that I feel would go into more details and in more depth with different parts of people's experience.
Yeah. So thank you so much for being on the podcast and connected back with me, almost 2 years later.
I know.
Sharing your story with us. I know that a lot of the listeners will be able to definitely draw from your healing and your experience. And I know that they will find some solace in knowing that they're not alone on this journey. So thank you so much for sharing.
Definitely. I love to share. So thank you for having me, Erica.
You are so welcome.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. There are so many ways to connect with the Sisters in Loss community. Join our monthly support group, our Sisters in Loss Healing Collective at sistersinlosshealing.com. Join our free Facebook group at sistersinloss.com/community, or text sisters to 797979 to download your free Journal to Healing ebook. That is sisters to 797979 to download your free Journal to Healing ebook. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Sisters in Loss, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Yeah, girl, we on YouTube at Sisters in Loss TV. We love you for listening. Keep the faith. Until next time, this is Erica, and I'll talk to you soon.